I want to share with you some of the steps of forgiveness. Yesterday we talked about why forgive. We talked about the price you pay when you don't forgive. We actually came to the conclusion that forgiveness is so beneficial to the one who's forgiving others that it could almost be considered a selfish act, because you're benefiting by it. It's not like you're helping the other person. Yeah, they get some benefit from it too, maybe, if they choose to, but that's secondary. The important thing is that you benefit by it. So today we want to talk about how to forgive, because one of my assertions is simply saying the words, I forgive you, is only the starting place. It is not the complete process of forgiveness. By itself, it will not get you there. However, it is a good starting place. So I want to walk you through an understanding of forgiveness today, and that's our goal. And I understand I just have 1 hour to take a 6-week seminar and boil it down, so I'm not going to cover it all, but I will give you the essential points. So here's the principle I want us to anchor in our mind. Whenever God has a truth for us, you can guarantee that Satan will have a counterfeit deception. And here's the trick. His deception becomes so attractive that the majority of people will choose the deception over the truth. Now, we sit here smugly in this tent as Seventh-day Adventists and say, yeah, Satan can deceive all those people out here, but he's not going to deceive us. Well, I'm going to share with you that Satan's subtleties are so deceptive that most of you have probably followed his substitute for forgiveness. Don't beat yourself up because of it. I have too. It is so carefully crafted that we think it becomes the right way to deal with hurt and pain. So I want you to understand the deception so that you can stop yourself from doing that, because most of us are doing the deception and we don't even know it. So what is Satan's deception for forgiveness? Well, we don't have to guess at it. We find it right there in the very beginning story in the book of Genesis when Adam and Eve first sinned. And God came down from the Garden of Eden to offer to Adam and Eve, because he recognized that they had fallen short. This did not catch him off guard. He wasn't surprised by it. He hoped and prayed it wouldn't happen, but it did. And God had a plan. And the plan was devised from time eternity that should people ever hurt and destroy each other, God has a plan to redeem us. And the plan was simple. He would offer to us forgiveness. But what did Adam and Eve do? Do you remember the story? You know, Eve ate of the fruit, ran to Adam, offered him some. He said, oh, I can't bear to lose this beautiful soulmate of mine. And so he ate of the fruit too. And then they both ran, and the first thing they did was they tried to hide. You see, the first thing we do when we are hurt is that we try to hide it. We try to bury it deep in our hearts so that nobody sees it or knows about it. Oh, we don't sew fig leaves together today, but we do hide it. And so there are people in every congregation who smile on the outside but are hurting on the inside. We learn to hide our pain. And then the next thing we do, so when God came, so they ran and hid. Remember, they sewed the fig leaves. That's what we do when we're hurting. We hide it. And then God comes and confronts them. He's right there with them. And he asks them, why are you hiding? Why would you hide from me? I know you're in trouble. I know you're hurting, but I have come to bring you forgiveness. And we will go through this together and you will be healed. But what did Adam and Eve do instead of engaging forgiveness? Do you remember what they did? They started blaming. And what did Adam say? This woman, that you made, God. Let's not forget that. This woman that you made, she's the problem. I wouldn't be in this predicament if it wasn't for her. And then, of course, Eve goes, whoa, don't blame me. I wouldn't be in this predicament if it wasn't what? For that serpent. The serpent deceived me. And if that serpent had been in this conversation, guess what the serpent would have said? The devil made me do it. It would have blamed the devil. You see, that's what we do when we've been hurt. Our first instinct is not to go to forgiveness. Our first instinct is to go to blame. And so we blame our parents. We blame our pastor. We blame our boss. We blame our children. We blame our neighbor. We blame the church members who don't understand. We blame, we blame, we blame. And I want to tell you, the blame game is Satan's deception to keep our minds off of the possibility of forgiveness. And so I see people all the time, when I ask them, how is things going in their life? And all of a sudden they recall this story of something that terrible has happened in their lives, and they share the story. They share it in such a way that you don't hear a searching and longing for forgiveness. You hear an emphasis on blame and what the other person did to me and how terrible of a person they are and how mean they were to do such a thing to me. Have you ever found yourself blaming someone else for your circumstances? If so, then you have fallen into Satan's snare and have been hooked by a false understanding of forgiveness. So given that, when you have been wronged, you have a choice to make: to forgive or to blame. Now think about that. Every time someone has hurt you, you only have two choices. You can blame the person who hurt you for your situation, or you can forgive the person who hurt you. I'll tell you what most people default to: blame. In fact, most of us don't even think about forgiveness the first time we've been hurt. It doesn't even cross our mind. And so the purpose of doing seminars in your churches, the purpose of this message today, is to give people, to remind people they have a choice. They can choose forgiveness. Life is defined by the choices you make, not the circumstances you are dealt. Most people believe that they're a product of the circumstances. They grew up in a terrible home. Their parents were abusive, and my life is all messed up because of it. Or I was doing so well in my professional career, and then I got fired. And now look at where I am. I'm falling right back down where I started from. All that time got me nowhere. Most people define their situation by the circumstances they had to deal with. And yet the truth is, it is not circumstances that define us. It is choice. Remember the statement, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? It would have been easy for Jesus to say, my circumstances disadvantaged me to become a great religious leader. I was born on the wrong side of the tracks. But it's not circumstances. It's the choices that we make that determine what we become. And I'm confronting you this morning with the simple fact that when you have been hurt, and everyone in this audience, myself included, has been hurt, we have a choice to make. Will you forgive or will you not forgive? So I'm going to help you remember that choice. I'm going to say it as Shakespeare might have stated it, so you'll remember it easier. To forgive or not to forgive? That is the question. That is the question you must answer. And by the way, no one else can make you choose forgiveness. I can't make you choose forgiveness. Your spouse can't make you choose forgiveness. Your pastor can't make you choose forgiveness. No one can make you choose forgiveness. It is your choice. All I'm challenging you to think about is when you choose not to forgive, what's the consequences? And I can tell you the consequences of failing to forgive is a lifetime of bitterness and resentment. It's being stuck with a story that won't leave your head about what someone else has done to you. And every time you think about that story, you relive that experience, and you're killing yourself anew by being trapped in a toxic, poisonous situation. Most don't think of forgiveness when they have been harmed. The reason for this is that feelings process through your brain faster than do thoughts. So you're already feeling upset about what happened. You're already feeling the resentment about what happened before you're even fully aware of your thought process. That's why instinctually you will feel upset before you even think of forgiveness. The problem is when you feel upset, your natural inclination is to go to blame. So you'll go down this pathway of deception to blame and never even really think about it. Your feelings drive you there. Understandably so. What the person did hurt me. I didn't like it. It upset me. I'm feeling upset. I'm not very happy right now. I don't like what happened. And from there, it quickly leads to, if you hadn't done this to me, my life would not be so upset right now, right? All of that is logical. All of that flows quickly. The problem is all of that leads to a dead end. And you can't get out of that dead end unless you stop the process and choose forgiveness. So here's something to help understand that process. It's a very, if any of you took any psychology or counseling classes, you learned this in the basic course. And that is the notion of stimulus and response. Remember that? Pavlov's dog, stimulus and response. So something happens and you react. Very basic, fundamental. The problem is that principle never elevates us to being human beings. Because animals function under stimulus response too. And most people don't elevate beyond their basic instincts, stimulus and response. So I want to suggest to you a different approach. Between stimulus and response, we need to insert a pause, a moment of reflection. Call it a moment of prayer, if you will. It's a time when you stop and you think before you act. You pray before you act. You consider a range of responses and you choose your response. And it is this pause between stimulus and response that makes us uniquely human. For in the animal kingdom, they don't have that ability to create that pause. Only you and I do. It's a gift God gave us. It is what I believe is the imago Dei, the image of God. The ability to choose our life's direction rather than living the direction others have imposed on us. It's what allows us to break the grip of sin-filled world and to live a different life. And all of that happens in that moment between stimulus and response. I want to do a little exercise with you. I want you to experience the power of unconsciousness and making decisions in our lives so that you can then stop that process and get conscious. Because that pause between stimulus and response is simply a transition from unconsciousness, I do something as a reaction, to consciousness, I choose my response. So if you'll simply take your hands like this and fold them together like that. And then when everybody's got your hands together, I want you to look down and I want you to observe which thumb is on the top. It's got to be either the left thumb or the right thumb. So you got a 50-50 chance of getting this right. Actually, no, you can't get it wrong because you know which thumb is on the top. So let me ask you a question. If your right thumb was on the top, would you please raise your hands now? Wow, look at all the right thumb top people in this audience today. So let's be fair to the left thumb people. If your left thumb was on top, would you raise your hands? Wow, look at all the left thumb people. Did anybody raise their hands twice? Okay, just checking. Did you get a sense of that? Half the people in this world put the right thumb on top, and half the people of this world put the left thumb on top, and it has nothing to do with whether you're left-handed or right-handed. Absolutely nothing. It is a 50-50 chance choice that when you are wiggling around in Sabbath school or in your classroom and your teacher wants to quiet you down, one of the tricks is to have you fold your hands and sit at your desk. Why fold your hands? Because if you don't fold your hands, your arms get swinging, okay? You fold your hands and you can't swing so much. It's a way of calming down the classroom. And the very first time that you put your hands together, all of heaven paused and said, I wonder if they'll put the left thumb on top or the right thumb on top. No one knew. You didn't even know. You just did it. And then the next time you did it, and the next time until you developed a habit. So let me ask a question. When I told you to put your hands together like this, did anyone think, let's see, I think I'll put the right thumb on the top. Anyone think that through? No. You simply did it by habit. Now, I want to show you how powerful habits are. So this time, I want you to do this, and I want you to put your hands together, but if you put your right thumb on the top last time, put your left thumb on the top, okay? Reverse it. Are you ready? Reverse it. How does that feel? You're laughing. That feels awkward, doesn't it? Who in their right mind would ever put their hands together that way? What were they thinking? It's not natural. You don't do it this way. You do it this way, right? Do you know that half the world does it just the opposite of you, and to them that's perfectly normal? Now, I know this is awkward, and you're probably going, oh, help me, help me. So you can put your hands together the right way now and feel comfortable again, okay? Doesn't that feel a lot more natural? It's the same thing with forgiveness. You have to choose to forgive. It's not going to come naturally. When someone hurts you and you go, ouch, your left thumb or right thumb is always going to be on the top. And you are always going to do what you've always done. And by the way, you know what we've always done? We've always blamed. It's what we learned as children. We learned that when there's a problem, figure out whose fault it is. But I'm asking you to do something differently. I'm asking that when you forgive, you take responsibility for your life. You don't remain the victim and say, my life is miserable because of them. You say, no, when I forgive, I become responsible for myself. In fact, I like the word responsibility. Literally, it means my ability to choose my response. Thus, responsibility. And only forgiveness gives us the ability to move from a victim who has done something to upset my life to a victor who's found a way that I can move on with my life. Now, with that said, I just want to comment briefly. There are victims. Children who are sexually or physically abused by their parents are a victim. They are a child. There is nothing they could have done about it. There is nothing they did to deserve that. There is nothing wrong they did to be in that situation. The problem is, when you become an adult, are you still trapped in that child frame of reference? Do you still see yourself as that victim, or can you grow up through that and say, that's not something I wanted in my life, that was something terrible that happened in my life, but they are not going to define my life. God is going to define my life. And I am going to forgive and let go. That's the journey. Notice the difference. Blame focuses on what another person did. Forgiveness focuses on what you're going to do. Huge difference. Satan loves to keep us trapped. He would love it if we felt powerless to do anything with our life. He wins. It doesn't matter what trap you're in, whether it's legalism, resentment, he doesn't care as long as you're stuck. Because the Christian faith is a faith of growth. It's a journey to something better. And so he can get us stuck anywhere in that journey and he wins. Only forgiveness unsticks us from our past. When I grew up, we had a doghouse just like this, sitting across our kitchen table. I don't know if any of you ever had that. I've found a few other people that had that exact same doghouse. Basically, it's a doghouse with 5 hooks. And across the chest of every dog is their name. So in our family, we had the mommy dog, the daddy dog, the Dick dog, the Terry dog, and the Brad dog, okay? And every morning at breakfast, my parents desired that we improve our lives. And so what we did at breakfast is we reviewed the previous day's activities and then took a family vote who was the poorest performing member of the family, who did the most things wrong, the most troublesome, didn't act properly, did something that upset someone else. And we took a family vote, and that person then went in the doghouse and spent the day there until the next day, when we had another family discussion, reviewed the days. And of course, the idea behind this is you didn't want to stay in the doghouse, so you worked real hard to be good the next day so that someone else would go in the doghouse and you could come out. Well, guess who spent the majority of their childhood in the doghouse? I spent at least an average of 5 out of the 7 days a week in the doghouse. Some days I ran all 7. Okay? Not that I was bad, I was just mischievous. I always wanted to know where the boundaries were. And if it wasn't clear, I tested them just to be certain. And in that process, I always was the one that acted a little more outside the norm. And so at family vote, I would end up in the doghouse. What did I learn about how to deal with problems? I learned that when there's a problem, figure out who to blame. By the way, there are people in leadership in the workplace today that's their mantra. They're never at fault. It's someone else's fault. And you may have been unfortunate enough to be blamed for someone else's mistake, but you were too low down the totem pole to do anything about it. You just had to eat it. As a society, as a church, how often do we blame? So, conclusion, and then we'll move on to forgiveness. I want us to stop the blame game. So here's what it looks like. It's all your fault. Have you ever said that? We had this wonderful supper tonight, and now it didn't work. It's your fault. You forgot to tell me what time they were coming, and now they're here and the food isn't ready. It's your fault. Okay? It's all your fault. Therefore, it's your fault that I'm feeling upset right now. It's your fault for the misery in my life. And then you come to a conclusion, which is the title of one of my chapters, My Life is Your Fault. Now, there's a great statement to make on the judgment day when Christ comes and say, God, don't hold me accountable for what happened. My life is her fault, his fault. It just doesn't work that way. To stop the blame, you must put yourself back in charge of your life. So let's look at the 2 pathways. Pathway number 1, you're responsible for my pain. So you must do something to make me feel better. And if you refuse to help me, I will resent you. Ever go down that pathway? Oh yeah, far too often. Let me suggest an alternative pathway. The road less traveled. I'm responsible for my happiness. So, I must make choices and act in ways that are in the best interest for myself. And no matter what you do, I am free to forgive and to live my life. Have you found that freedom yet in forgiveness? Where no longer are you trapped with the old stories. If not, then let's understand how to forgive. The first step, and perhaps the hardest step, is to stop the blaming and re-examine your view of the other person as all bad. So let me illustrate. My best friend, you ever see this happen in grade school, elementary school? I don't know, what do you call it over here? But you know, the early schooling. Primary school, thank you. Have you ever noticed in primary school that 2 friends were the best friends in the world and something happened and one says to the other, I'll never talk to you again as long as I live? Okay. They went from a best friend to a worst enemy. I've seen that happen in church. Hey, I've seen that happen in marriages. People get married and they're in love with each other, and 5 years, 10 years later, they hate each other. What just happened? How is it that someone you liked can become someone you don't like? Well, it's very simple. Let me explain. When you like someone, you focus on their good attributes. And when you don't like someone, you focus on all their bad attributes. And if you wonder how this works, get into an argument with your spouse and see what history of that relationship comes most immediately to their mind. Chances are, if I've done something that's been disruptive to my wife, she doesn't immediately recall all the good things we did together. She's more likely to recall all the other things I did that is just like this time. So the first step is to recognize that my view of the other has changed, and therefore it's distorting my worldview. So let me give an illustration. My daughter, when she was in high school, bless her heart, she decided to bring her first boyfriend date home to meet her dad. I was so proud of her. Not every daughter does that, but she wanted me to meet her first boyfriend. Now, being the responsible parent that I am, I'm not going to take this, what do you call him over? A bloke. I'm not going to take this bloke at face value, okay? I'm going to do my homework on him to find out what he's really like. So I started calling some of my friends. Tell me about this young man. And I started to hear things that concerned me. And I began to think, this may not be the best choice for my daughter for her first date. So I had my daughter sit down. I said, I want to talk to you about your boyfriend. And, not an extreme boyfriend, this is a first date, but we got to get used to how we're going to talk as father and daughter, So I said, I want to talk to you a little bit about it. Did you know that he did this? And did you know that he said this? And did you know that last Tuesday night he went there? Did you know that? And my daughter says, Dad, do you know how wonderful he is? Do you know how kind he's been to me? Do you know the nice things he says about me? And I got in touch with that conversation for the first time. You've heard the expression, love is blind? Do they have that expression in Australia? Okay, so you've heard the expression, love is blind. I got in touch with that Matt because all my daughter could see about this young man was all his good points. She didn't see the bad points, and even when I pointed them out to her, as a responsible parent that I am, even when I pointed them out to her, she kind of glossed over them. They never registered because she was focused on all his good attributes. Love is blind. But here's another truth. Anger is equally as blind. When you're upset at someone, you don't see their good points. You only see the bad things about them. Think about it. I do marriage counseling. And I would talk to, I have a husband and wife in my church, and they would just look at each other with these loving eyes, and they were so wonderful and loved each other. And 10 years later, they're in my office saying, can't stand that person. I want out. And Pastor, you got to figure out how I can do that without getting in trouble with the church. But I'm getting out. Can't stand the person. Well, tell me a little bit about the person. And out comes the scroll of all the bad things about them. Not one good thing on the list. And so I can remember asking a couple, I said, so can I ask you a question? And they said, yeah, go ahead. Why did you marry that no good? Why would you marry someone with all the... And then they scratched their head and they said, Pastor, that's a good question. I have no idea why I married him. Probably a big mistake. And I said, whoa, time out. I married the two of you. I asked you the questions, and you told me how wonderful that person was. You listed all their good characteristics. What happened? And you know what they say? They changed. I said, well, that's interesting. Both of you have been members of my church for the last 10 years. I haven't noticed this big change. When did it come over? Well, it came over when this event happened. What changed? Probably the other person didn't change that much. They may change. We all change a little bit, but we don't change that dramatically. Our personalities are fairly fixed. We can modify them, of course. What changed? What changed is what you focused on. And when you're hurting, you focus on all the bad things. That's why people who are hurting are miserable, because all they see is the bad things. And here's the problem with human nature. our focus isn't specific, it becomes generalized. And soon, I'm seeing bad things everywhere. In the church, in my neighborhood. People don't understand. There are bad people everywhere. People then become miserable. They don't want to go outside because there's a bad person out there. They don't want to go to work because all those people at work are bad people. They don't even want to go to church because the church is filled with bad people. Haven't you ever visited someone that stops going to church? They rarely stop going because of a theological disagreement. They stop going because the church is full of bad people. No one understands. Our view of others is determined not by who they are, but by what we choose to focus on. Think about that from a Christian perspective. When Christ looks at you, what does he see? Does he see all of our faults? And believe me, if he did, we're all lost. We're all judged and judged unrighteous. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Everyone, if God wants to focus on your bad points, forget it. Game over. But what does God focus on? God chooses to focus on our good points, doesn't he? And by focusing on our good points, he sees within us more to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. And God can only do that because of forgiveness. If God didn't have the ability to forgive, he couldn't ignore our bad points. He couldn't allow us into heaven. He could not allow us into the presence of God because we'd be consumed. If God only saw our bad points, if he didn't have the ability to forgive, we wouldn't be here today. But because he is willing to forgive, he can see us as something different. This process is the process of forgiveness. Moving from a view of the other as all bad to seeing the other as a mixture of good and bad. It tones down the anger. If I really want to be angry, I can't see your good points. I can only focus on your bad points. Listen to somebody when they're upset. You won't hear one good thing about that other person come out of their mouth. Not when they're upset. Because anger focuses on a single aspect and finds every illustration possible to reinforce that aspect. That's how one's best friend can become their worst enemy. That's how a couple once in love can't stand each other. We just said that. Keep in mind, the goal of forgiveness is not to forget. Rather, the goal of forgiveness is to remember in a different way. So now I've got to unpack that, because that's the next step of forgiveness. So, I told you yesterday that the most common definition of forgiveness is forgive and forget. And then I told you if you believe that definition, you'll never experience forgiveness because you're never going to forget. I'll give you a quick illustration on that. I got fired from a job at work where I'd worked for 10 years. I was devastated. I was depressed. I was bitter. I had spent 10 years giving my best into that. And it was a church-related job. The church did this to me. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to leave the house. I was upset. I was bitter. And I was depressed. Because someone took away my livelihood. And my identity was with what I did. And with what I did was no longer possible, then who I am can't be that great. I felt like thrown out trash. Yesterday's newspaper, garbage. Don't need them anymore? Throw them out on the streets, unemployed. I'll never forget that experience. Stayed home day after day after day. Didn't even want to go out of the house. My wife would say to me, bless her heart, you need to get a job. We're having a hard time paying the bills here. Have you thought about going out back to work again? And I would say, why should I go to work? Somebody else could just fire me for no good reason at all. Why would I want to put myself back in that situation again? It's hard to forgive when you have been hurt. It's hard to see it in any different light. It's hard to move on. So I want to be very clear that forgiveness is not easy. But forgiveness is not forgetting. Could you imagine if I would have gone to my bed that evening and said a prayer and say, Lord, forgive them? and then forgot it. Forgiveness is forgetting. What would I most likely do the next morning? Well, I'd most likely get dressed and go to work, right? It's what I did every morning. Why not? I forgot about the event, right? I said I forgive you, and forgiveness is forgetting, so I forgot all about it. So I get dressed and go to work. I'm walking down the hallway. People are staring at me, kind of funny. I go, that's odd. Why are they staring at me funny? I come to work every day. Finally, someone gets up the courage and asks me the question, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm coming to work. What? And they said, well, don't you remember? Remember what? Well, you got fired yesterday. You're kidding me. I got fired yesterday? How did that happen? Do you see how ridiculous it is to believe that forgiveness is forgetting? It's absolutely ridiculous. So when you feel like you failed at forgiving because you still remember what happened, no relationship. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering in a different way. So forgiveness is a process I like to call reframing. Seeing things from a different point of view. By the way, this process doesn't change the facts. Okay? It's not some hocus pocus, pretend it didn't happen. Because that's not reality. Forgiveness doesn't change the facts, but forgiveness changes my view of. By the way, we react more to our interpretation of events than we do to the event itself. When someone hurts me, the first question that comes to my mind is, why did they do it? Which has nothing to do with what they did, but I'm already going to why did they do it? And that's an interpretation. For the Bible says, no man knows why they do. Paul says in Romans 7, I do things that I don't even know why I'm doing it. So stop trying to judge other people's motives. It gets you nowhere. That's the blame game. And we're going to stop playing that game. We're going to forgive to live. Okay? Can someone help me here? I'm not getting any channel. There we go. So forgiveness does not change what happens. Oh, let's go to the next one. I already said that one. I don't know why this all of a sudden is working so great. Okay, the facts are the facts. One more. I've been trying to change these while I talk, but it wasn't changing, so my apologies. It's working now. Thank you. All right, so let me illustrate. How you frame something determines what you see. It's your frame of reference. So let me give you an illustration. I had a husband and wife that were a member of my church. And I remember visiting in their home, and right over the mantle of the fireplace was this beautiful big picture. They both loved the outdoors. And it was a picture of both of them standing arm in arm on the top of a mountain. And for them, it was kind of an expression of their relationship together has made the world better, and they're on top of everything. And here was this beautiful artistic photograph on top of the mantle. And now I'm going to visit that home because they have divorced. And I have to admit, I had a bit of curiosity. I wonder if that picture is still going to be above the mantle. So I walked in the house, and when I walked in the living room, it must have been embarrassing, but I immediately stared right over the mantle. I wanted to see what was there. And you know what I saw? I saw a picture of this lady standing on the top of the mountain all by herself. The picture had been cut in half and reframed. And I'm going to tell you something. You and I do that all the time. We frame our worldview. We choose what goes in the picture, and we choose what gets left out of the picture. And the more we frame things, the more that colors how we see things. An optimist frames possibilities. A pessimist frames problems. An extrovert frames people. An introvert frames books. You know, we frame life by our point of view. That's why every one of us has a different point of view. And I'll tell you how I know this is true. Last year, my sister and I went to the town that we grew up. We hadn't done that in 30 years. My wife was with me. And we're walking around from place to place where we used to go as children. And my sister would share her memory of that event. And then I would share my memory of that event. And guess what? They were very different stories. We go to the next place and we do the same thing. And then my sister would say, Mom always liked you best. And I go, you're kidding me. She always spanked me and I was in trouble. She never spanked you. She must have liked you best. And my sister says, oh no, Mom always talked about you. She ignored me. What? She was always telling me, why couldn't I be like you? Do you see? And my wife is getting a chuckle out of this because she's beginning to wonder if we grew up in the same home together. We saw things so differently. How could it be that we were in the same place at the same time and we came to such different conclusions? We framed it differently. And here's the thing. You choose your frame. You may not have known that, but you do. And you choose what goes in your picture and what doesn't. You are the artist of your life, and you paint your picture. Oh, you thought other people painted it. You thought other people splatted dirt all over your picture. But no, they can't, because your picture is seen from your side of the canvas. They can do whatever they want to on that side. It's your side that matters. So let's take a look at that. What do you see in this picture? Well, probably most of us see someone that's either in deep contemplation or that's very, very sad. Let's reframe it, okay? Now what do you see? Oh, now you see some context, right? Now we know why this person's so worried. They're sitting in jail. I'd be worried if I was in jail too. Should we reframe this one more time? Let's reframe it. Notice how same picture, I just changed the frame. Let's do it one more time. Now what do I see? Oh, guy's not really in jail. This is a moving picture. He's just acting. No big deal. Do you see how framing things changes the way I see things? And this happens to us every single time. In other words, you frame your life by what you choose to retain in your life. So forgiveness then is the process of reframing. I'm going to jump to a conclusion here. When Jesus was taken to Calvary, this is the clearest scriptural reference about reframing. When Jesus was taken to Calvary, and there he was nailed. Do you remember who nailed him to the cross? It was Roman centurions. By the way, you know what these Roman centurions were experts at? Crucifixions. Because in Rome, you didn't just stick somebody and pound them to the cross and put them up. No. You placed their hands, their arms, with a bit of a bend. You took their knees. You didn't put them straight. You bent their knees. And you had to place them like this, not like this. Why? Because on the cross, as you hung, it put pressure on your chest and it suffocated you. You couldn't breathe. So you had to push up to expand your chest to get a breath of fresh air. And then you would hang. And after hanging, you would push up again. That's why people didn't die on the cross the same day they were nailed, because they would keep breathing. But eventually, after a day or two of this, every time you pulled up, you weren't grabbing a grip to pull up, were you? You were pulling against the nails, and it would hurt. Every time you took a breath, it would hurt like crazy. And then you'd hang to relieve the pain. But then you'd start to suffocate, and you'd have to pull up again to get another breath. And then you'd hang, and then you'd run out of breath, and you'd have to pull again. You would literally torture yourself with every breath. And here's the unique thing of the cross, and why it was so distasteful to the Jews. Because the way you died on the cross was you chose to die. And the Jews considered it an act of suicide because you chose to die. And you chose to die by simply saying, I cannot experience the excruciating pain one more time. I'm just going to lie here and suffocate and die. You see, these Roman centurions knew exactly what they were doing. Exactly. So how is it when Jesus is nailed to the cross, he makes this statement? Do you remember this statement? Father, forgive them. How does it end? For they know not what they do. Now, come on, Jesus. You're not that foolish. These men knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew how to do it. They had done it thousands of times before. So why would Jesus say, forgive them, for they know not what they do? Well, let me give you an insight. It all has to do with your frame of reference, doesn't it? If you have a small frame and you can only see the cross and you can only see Jesus and the soldiers there, then Jesus' statement doesn't make any sense at all, because these centurions knew exactly what they were doing. But if you enlarge your frame, if you make it bigger, and you bring more information into it, guess what happens? Jesus saw this event in the light of the great controversy. He saw the struggle between good and evil. He saw that this was foretold in prophecy. This was all preordained. This was God's plan. And in that picture, these soldiers had no idea what they were doing, correct? No idea. In fact, if they would have known, they probably wouldn't have done it. That's reframing. And I'd like to suggest that when you're hurting and you're miserable, your frame is too small. You're only focusing on the thing that happened. And of course it's upsetting, but your frame is too small. Forgiveness is the process of enlarging your frame until you see the bigger picture. And once you see the bigger picture, then the pain becomes less personal. So if I can see that the reason the bully hit me, and I hated that. I remember walking home from school and there was a bully on the block, and I would go all kinds of ways home not to pass his house. Because when I did, he'd come out and smash me. Big kid. Should have been, no, anyhow. And until I can reframe him, if all I look at him as the bully, I will hate him. But if I can reframe, guess why bullies bully? Because they have been bullied. You can start to get a little empathy towards their situation. It doesn't excuse what they did. What they did is still wrong. Wish they hadn't done it. But now I have a broader perspective. And by the way, I'm so glad God is love and He's empathetic because He has a little bit of empathy towards us. Okay? Wonderful God. Reframing. So I've had people ask me, how long should I reframe? How often? Have you ever tried to reframe something and the same old picture comes back? Peter had that question too. Lord, I'm trying to forgive, but it's so hard. How many times do I need to do this? 7 times? And what did Jesus say? No, I tell you not 7, but 70 times 7. That's why I say forgiveness is a process, not the words. Every time that thought comes back to you, reframe it. Every time that bitterness comes back, reframe it. Every time you feel overwhelmed by what happened, reframe it. And until we can forgive like Jesus forgave, the big picture, in context, we'll struggle. So work at it. Don't be impatient with yourself. Don't get discouraged. Forgiveness is not easy, but it is absolutely essential. I want to end with this story. It's a true story. It's a story of my cousin who went over to Vietnam. It was a war that was very unpopular in the States. And he went over to Vietnam, and while there, he got caught. And he got put into a prison camp. He got put into the infamous Hanoi prison, where they were placed in bamboo cages that were so small they couldn't stand up to even exercise or stretch. All they could do was lie down. And he'd be kept in these cages for 23 hours a day, allowed out just 1 hour a day to walk around a little bit and to stretch his muscles, and then back into the cage for another 23 hours. And if he got belligerent, if he said something he shouldn't, or if he threw his food out in defiance, he didn't get that hour break. He would stay in that cage for 24 hours plus another 23 hours. And when he came back from the States, and fortunately he survived, he didn't die there. When he came back to the States, he was so bitter and so hateful against his government that put him in that situation, against the Vietnams that put him in that situation, that he checked out of society and he went and lived way hidden with Rottweilers and a sign that says, walk on this property and you'll get eaten alive. I couldn't even go visit him. I'd have to call him first, and then half the time he wouldn't believe it was me. He had become, his frame of reference, his view of the world was very dark. And it's understandable. Look what he went through. But he blamed everyone for his circumstances. It's understandable. Look what he went through. But he was missing the mark. His life was miserable. 25 years after that event, the United States built the Vietnam Memorial Wall. It's a big black marble wall that zigzags along, and on that wall is etched the names of all the men and women who gave their lives in that war. And people come there to see it. They'll take sheets of paper and etch out a name. My cousin went to that wall 25 years. And there he met another POW that was in the same prison that he was. And I want to share with you now their conversation. You got the setting. So the friend stands here and looks at my cousin and says this. Ask this question. Have you forgiven your captors yet? Tough question. My cousin had no doubt of the answer to that. He spun around on his tires and on his heels, and he looked at his friend and he says, no, I will never, ever forgive them for what they did. I will never forgive them. And you know what his friend said to him? He looked at my cousin and said this. Then they still have you prisoner, don't they? When we fail to forgive, we are locked in the prison of our own bitterness and hate. And we will die there. You simply cannot swallow a poison pill and hope the other person dies. The only one suffering is you. I want to pray for you now that you will feel inspired, that you will feel challenged, that you will feel the invitation to practice the most fundamental Christian practice of all. The most essential, we should be called the Seventh-day Forgiveness Church, right? If we really want the spotlight to shine on us in the last days, if we want to be a peculiar people, it's not because of how we dress or what we eat. It's because we forgive in a world that's unforgiving. That's the seal of God. That is the seal that God is waiting to place on us, a people who reflects His character, a character of forgiveness. I'm going to pray for you now that you will find it in your heart to walk the forgiving life. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you that we could assemble together at this great camp meeting and understand, Lord, that there is a message for the end time. There are 3 angels behind that message declaring to a lost world the everlasting gospel of Jesus Christ. And Christ's purpose was to save a sin-destroyed earth. And His method of doing that was to bring forgiveness to His children. First, by forgiving us, but then, by us having received the gift of forgiveness, we in turn forgive others so that we are set free from the prison of this world. We are set free from the negative, hurtful thoughts that dominate our thinking. And we find the freedom that's only found in Christ. And indeed, we are set free. But Lord, you never forced us out of that cage. You simply handed us the key. It is our choice to forgive or not to forgive. I pray that each one here, in the moment of prayer with you, in their hearts privately, they will say to you, Lord, teach me, help me, strengthen me to be a forgiving person. In your name we pray, Lord. Amen.